reproductive system. There are a couple of sections in this lecture. Hopefully we'll get through part of section 1 today. On the female anatomy, section 2 are female hormones, so we'll look at cycles of hormones in the menstrual cycle, and then finally section 3, male anatomy. This corresponds with about 1044, page 1044 in your textbook. Okay, so if we take a look at a cross-section of the female reproductive system, what type of section is this? There were 3 sections on the last test. Remember, sagittal, frontal, and transverse. And so what is this?
Sagittal.
Sagittal. This is a sagittal section, right? Basically right down the middle. Okay? All right, and so if you look at, here is the bladder. And so the bladder sits right here, and here's the uterus on top of it. Well, think about women who get pregnant have to go pee all the time. Why? Because now this is expanding, and where is it expanding? It's pushing down on the bladder. So women's bladder is already about 1/3 smaller than men. Now when you get pregnant, it has even less retention. Okay, just a thought. But here's the uterus, and notice the uterus is kind of tipped. It's not straight up and down. It is in fact tipped forward. There's this thing called uterine prolapse, where the uterus can in fact come out, and some women present sometimes with their uterus hanging out, and the doctor has to go in and push it back inside, and then if it's really bad, they can put a couple stitches inside to hold it in place. But it is not held by any bones in place. Can't be. It's got to expand from this little itty-bitty thing to this big huge thing. Okay? So it can't be attached to any of the bones. It is attached by connective tissue, but not necessarily to any bones directly. Okay, then coming into the uterus is the uterine tube or the fallopian tubes, and then notice they come over, and here's the ovary. So the ovaries actually sit over here in the body and lead into the uterus. Okay, there are sections in the uterus which we'll talk about in more detail, and certainly when we look at it in your cycle. And then notice coming in around in the back, here is this is the colon, the descending and sigmoid colon going down into the rectum, so you have 3 systems all in a very small space. You have the urinary system coming out here, you have the reproductive system here, and the gastrointestinal or digestive system coming there. Okay? Okay. In front of the uterus and, excuse me, the bladder, there is the pubic symphysis. So that's the bone that you can feel right above your hips. Is that where I want to go? All right, I'm ready. All right, so if we look at it from a different perspective, from a frontal view, here's the uterus, and the top of the uterus has a specific term. It's not listed on here. And then here are the fallopian tubes coming in, and the ovaries. Notice the ovaries are connected to the uterus by an ovarian ligament. Okay, not by a bone or anything that strong, just not even a muscle, just a ligament. Again, it's not like the ovaries can contract or get closer to the uterus. The ligament just holds it in place. Okay, so you kind of have to think of this thing as it's kind of like a puppet suspended down in this abdominal pelvic cavity, and it's suspended by all of these ligaments. So there's a broad ligament here that holds the ovary in place, and then there are a couple of other ligaments that are attached back here in the back. The uterosacral ligament over on the side. And notice where the ureter is coming. So where's the ureter from? There are 2 of them, right? So where's the ureter going to be coming from? It's coming from each of the kidneys. And notice how it comes around the side of the uterus, and then it's going to go to the bladder in front. Okay? Keep that idea, so kidneys coming down, around, and then to the bladder in front. Because when we talk about the male system, you're going to see the same kind of thing, and what happens with males is a little bit different. All right. Okay. And in a little more detail. So if we took a cross-section of the ovary, a female at birth has all of the egg cells that she will ever need. Think about this. Let's say a girl starts her first, to make the math easy, starts her first period when she's 10 and stops her last, I know that's a little early, but that's okay, and stops her last period when she's 50. Okay? So she has 40 years of periods. Assuming she has one egg every month, okay, so 40 times, and she doesn't get pregnant, how many eggs does she need for her life?
40.
How many?
480.
480 eggs total. Okay? So you don't have to be born with a whole lot of eggs to have all of them that you need. Whereas males make between 1 and 5 million sperm every day. So they're not born with all the sperm that they have or need or whatever. Whereas females, in fact, they're not eggs yet. They're cells that will become eggs and have to develop and mature over time. Because when you're 5, nothing's happening down here, right? It's going to take hormones to start to turn these cells on from the primary oocytes into becoming an egg. Okay? Okay. All right. So if we look at, and when we look at the ovaries next week, you're going to find that they are in fact rather lumpy because there are different stages of development of the eggs in here. And if we look at a sheep's ovary, which is what we'll look at, think of a sheep doesn't just have one baby. She's going to have like 5 or 6 at a time. So she has to have a bunch of eggs ready to ovulate when she comes into heat. All right? Well, we only need one a month, but we still have them in various stages of development. And once the egg erupts from the ovary, it's got to be picked up. There's a gap. It's not like a straight, like, oh, you come out of here and you get on this conveyor belt that takes you right down to here. It doesn't quite work like that. There's a space between the ovary and the fallopian tubes. And so there have to be some finger-like structures called the fimbriae that kind of, if the ovary's sitting here, the fimbriae kind of help make sure we get that egg in and going in the right track. Because if it doesn't, let's say you got some active sperm and you release an egg over here and the active sperm come in and they get the egg here and fertilize it and the egg gets stuck out here, now you got a baby growing over here. It's called an ectopic pregnancy. Probability of that baby surviving is small. Okay? Making it to term, pretty small. Depends on where it implants, but if it's out here someplace, it's got to be at least in here somewhere if it doesn't make it all the way to the uterus. So it's really imperative that the fimbriae, think of fimbriae as fingers that kind of massage that ovary and help get that egg going in the right direction. Okay? All right, so if we take a cross-section of the fallopian tube and look at it, so here's the tube itself, but here's all the cells around it, and notice that you've got all of these columnar epithelial cells, the dark purple ones, all the way around it. And then over here you have lamina propria, in other words, layers of connective tissue and a little bit of muscle. Okay? If we look at that even a little bit more, you'll notice that there are mucin secreting cells. So in other words, we want to help the egg slide down that fallopian tube by secreting some mucus. And then some of these columnar cells have cilia. So they can help create a little mucus wave to get that egg down. Okay? You probably don't feel that every month, but it's happening. Okay? So we got to get that egg there as fast as possible in case it gets fertilized or to get it there to get fertilized. Most fertilization, in fact, occurs up in here someplace. If the egg gets all the way to here, it's probably toast. All right? Because it takes a couple of days, 3 or 4 days to get here. And if it takes that long, the eggs run out of gas. And so even if a sperm gets there, it's not going to happen. Okay, so most fertilization occurs up in here. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about what happens inside the ovary, just a little bit, during ovulation. So I'm sure you can, every once in a while, maybe not every month, but every once in a while, in the middle of your cycle, you have a little pain that you know down here something happened. Okay, you might or might not feel it. Some women are very, very attuned to it. Some women never feel it their whole life. But for the women who do, on day about between day 12 and day 16, there's just a little, ooh, maybe it's a little queasiness, whatever. That's the egg actually coming out of the ovary. Okay, and notice the ovary or the egg is surrounded by all kinds of fluid. It's not just a naked egg. Think about a chicken's egg. If you break open that chicken's egg, there's the yolk and then there's all that fluid around it. Well, this guy has to have some, she has to have some protection around it to keep it moist, to have some nutrients, to do all kinds of stuff. Okay, so here is ovulation, and we'll say that's day 14, just to make things easy. And out comes the egg. Well, what happens in the ovary afterwards? This egg came out of a whole cluster of cells, and the egg was just like the product of these cells pops out. But all these cells are still left here. And what happens with this is what's called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is going to stay here intact, and that's where the egg came out of. And it depends on what happens to the egg as to whether this corpus luteum becomes a corpus albicans and what the corpus albicans can produce. Okay? But somehow, the corpus luteum has to tell the uterus, oh, we just shipped a package. You need to be ready for that package to arrive. So it's got to tell, the ovary has to tell the uterus, get ready, some good stuff's coming. And what does the uterus have to do? Has to get thicker and make a really soft bed for that egg to land in. So in other words, your uterus is going to get thicker, the endometrium is going to get thicker in anticipation of this egg being fertilized and getting there. If the egg doesn't get fertilized, 14 days later, you say, oh, false alarm, get rid of it, start again. Start the whole process again. Okay? If the egg is fertilized and the uterus is ready, the egg implants and we're off to the races. Then the corpus albicans becomes really important in keeping that pregnancy viable, keeping it alive. Okay? Okay. All right. Now, let's talk about that egg. You know, I told you you needed 480 eggs, and you start with this process called oogenesis. Oogenesis is where you go from through, you know about mitosis and meiosis. Well, this is meiosis. So how do you get from this egg cell that you're born with to a viable ovum? And you know, in mitosis, one cell divides into two. In meiosis, one cell divides into four, and it takes 2 cycles. So in cycle 1, in meiosis 1, here you have mitosis, primary oocyte. That primary oocyte is going to divide, and it's going to undergo reduction division, and you're going to come out with 2 cells. One cell is the queen cell. The other cell is what's called a polar body. So you make one big cell and one tiny little cell. The queen cell gets all the good stuff. All the cytoplasm, most of the mitochondria, most of the endoplasmic reticulum, all the good stuff goes in here. Okay? This guy's hanging in there. Then we go to meiosis 2, the secondary oocyte. Now the polar body divides again, and it makes two more little shrimps. And this one divides again and makes one really big queen and one more shrimp. In other words, you have these first polar body, then you have a second polar body. Again, the queen steals all the good stuff, the mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, all that stuff, and this is now has to mature into a gamete. Okay, but only of this one cell, and it goes through meiosis 1 and meiosis 2 and makes 4 cells. Only one of them can possibly be fertilized. Only the ovum. These guys, they couldn't be fertilized, and if they were, nothing would happen. Okay. So you spend all of these, think of it, if this is the queen, then these guys become her court. The jester and the supporting cast, etc. So they're going to be there to help protect her, help her get on her way. Okay? Okay. So if we look at, here's the ovary, and look at the circuitous path the egg has to go. So here's the ovary, here's the suspensory ligaments, here's the fallopian tube coming down, and it comes into the top of the uterus. Okay, someplace you want to make sure you know the fundus of the uterus is that top little arch. Okay, so the very top of the uterus is the fundus, and you'll notice here's the bladder. This is looking down at it, and this is down in that abdominopelvic cavity. So it's resting down there. Notice there's a little bit of, that's in the posterior space, there's some space back here, so that when that fetus starts to develop, it can occupy some space back there. Okay. Okay, so just to put this back in perspective, where here's your ovarian ligament, here's the ovary coming out of here, the fimbriae. The fimbriae go into the uterine tube, or the fallopian tube comes down. Here's the fundus of the uterus. Then it gets down to the uterus. In the uterus we have the uterine cavity, which is the opening, or the space in here. But then on the uterus itself, there are 3 layers. On the inside is the endometrium. No, can't do that. Okay, so the endometrium is the innermost layer. And that's what you lose every month. So when you have your period, that's the part that's going to get washed out or flushed out. Has to rebuild every month, get ready for the next possible egg, fertilized egg to come in. Behind that is the myometrium. Myo means muscle. So guess what that does? During pregnancy, during delivery, that's what's got to squeeze and push that baby out. Okay? So the myometrium is the muscle layer. Also, if you have cramps at the end of the month, what's going to push that endometrium out? That's your myometrium. So cramps are caused by contractions of the myometrium. It's a smooth muscle, and it's gonna, you can't control it. I can't say, no, I don't want cramps, no, I don't want cramps now, and you still get a cramp. All right? It just happens. Because that's under involuntary control. And then the very outside of the uterus, there should be, where's the parametrium? I don't know that they have it layered. Yeah, there it is, parametrium. So the outer layer right here is a layer of really tight connective tissue that holds everything together in place. So those 3 layers are crucial. Endo, myo, and perimetriums. Those are the 3 layers of the uterus. Now, despite how big this makes it look, the uterus is actually pretty small. And it's going to stretch. It's got to be able to stretch, got to be able to grow. So you know you're going to have to be able to grow more myometrium, and certainly you grow endometrium every month. And the parametrium's got to also add as you get pregnant. But then what's part of the problem after the baby's gone, then you got to reabsorb all that extra tissue. Okay? Okay, now at the bottom, so if we have an egg, and it starts out over here, and it comes down through here, and let's say it goes to right here into this part of the endometrium. If it doesn't get fertilized, then that means it's got to go out through the cervix. All right, so the cervix is the junction between the vagina and the uterus. Okay, and I'm sure you've heard of cervical cancer, and that's why it's highly recommended you get pap smears and HPV shots, because this is really, think of all the stuff that's got to come out of here every month, okay? And so this is and this is really soft tissue, okay? And therefore, it's kind of vulnerable. Even though it's at the end of the vagina, it still is not the same muscular ring as the vagina, so it's a possibility, it's a hot spot for STDs. So you got to be really careful about your cervix and your cervical health. Okay. Then in the vagina itself, so the vagina is a long tube, and they don't have it labeled here very well. Right over here, there's a little area called the fornix. And there's a little extra space in most vaginas that kind of comes up like that, just a little bit. Okay? And it's just a little extra chamber. But assuming that sperm get deposited in here, the sperm are going to have to go from here all the way up through here and probably run into the egg someplace in there. Okay? So that's why during intercourse, a male is going to put 5 to 10 million sperm in here on the off chance that one or two of them will get there, and one will actually penetrate the egg and fertilize it. Ooh, 5 million to 1? Not good odds. But that's just the odds of life. Okay? Okay. Let's see if I think I have a better picture of, okay. So if we look a little more at depth at the layers in the uterus, so here is the endometrium, and you'll notice again that in the endometrium, it's this much in this diagram. All right. Now you're not going to lose all of it, but at the end of the month when your period starts, all of it bleeds, right? And there's kind of some goopy stuff. So all of this stuff is going to kind of tend to come off. It just literally sloughs off. And then now that means that these cells underneath here are going to have to get busy and start cell division and more capillaries and rebuild the thickness of the endometrium. Okay? Endometriosis is an infection or pain or problem with the endometrium. One of the things they sometimes do is a DNC, where they literally go in and scrape the endometrium of any problems, any spaces where they think there might be a problem. Okay, just wipe it off, let you build new. That happens, no big deal. And then here's the myometrium, the rather thick layer, and notice that there are lots and lots of blood supply to these tissues. Okay? Because if, by chance, an egg lands here, all right, immediately it's going to need sugar, it's going to need oxygen, it's going to need to get rid of the wastes, because by the time it gets here, it's no longer one cell, it's already started to divide into a mass of cells. So this is a mass of cells that lands here. It's got to have some energy, quick, before it runs out of gas. So it's really, really important that you have a very good capillary supply in that endometrium. Okay. Then once that develops, if the egg is fertilized, then you have to get all kinds of capillaries on this side and all kinds of capillaries on this side, and then that will develop into the umbilical cord. Okay. There is no direct line that's going to take mom's blood and go right into the developing fetus. There has to be a barrier between the two. Okay? Some chemicals can jump across that barrier. Some hormones can jump across that barrier. But what really has to go across that barrier is oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, sugar, nutrients, other nutrients, micronutrients, etc., calcium. Okay. Okay. Question on the structure of the uterus at this point. All right. Now, there are also endometrial glands. Now, why the heck would you have glands in your endometrium? What could they possibly do? What can glands produce? Think about the glands in your skin, right? You know, they can produce oil. All right. What would you want? Do you need oil in your endometrium? No, probably not. But you know you're going to need something to fight off bacteria, by chance if any bacteria got in there. You know you're going to want to be able to keep things lubricated and moist in there. So it's got to be a very moist environment. Yeah.
Some sort of, I forgot the word already. But, some sort of mucus.
Yes, it's going to produce some mucus, you bet. Okay. And that's going to help lubricate things in all kinds of ways. Okay, because you definitely don't want this to dry out because those cells will die. So you got to keep that moist, and the mucus will help maintain that. Okay. Okay. What do I need you to know about this? I don't think this is just another superior view, and you can see how the uterus is. Here's the going down to the vagina, which is right down here. There are your suspensory or uterosacral ligaments, and there's the ovary and the fallopian tubes. Okay. Okay. I think we're. Oh, we'll miss that. All right. Now, what kinds of cells make up the uterus? So we have all kinds of stratified squamous cells, so they're stacked on top of each other. Because think about, where do you have squamous epithelial cells? You have them in places where you're going to lose things. So, in other words, if you chew up a piece of meat, you know you're going to have stratified squamous cells here in your mouth and your throat, because that piece of meat's going to pull some cells with it when it goes. So if you're going to lose some cells, you're going to have stratified cells. So, you know you're going to lose some tissue every month, so you're going to have some stratified cells there. Okay? Because they can be lost, they can be sloughed off, no big deal. But then again, here are your blood vessels, and then here's the lamina, which then leads to the muscles. Okay? So this is what do you lose when you have your period? It's going to be mostly stratified squamous epithelial cells. Consider them the foot soldiers of your body. If you're going to lose something, lose stratified squamous. You can make more of them. They're a dime a dozen. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the vagina now, aren't I? Oh, okay. I need to go back and talk about this, about the structure in the vagina. All right, so what is the function of the vagina? It's got two functions, really, right? One, it's a birth canal. So that fetus has to get out, or that baby has to get out someplace. So it's got to get out. It's got to go. You don't want the uterus right exposed to the air or exposed to the world, so that you just kind of squat down and drop out a baby. I mean, that would be easier, but that would also make it much more exposed to bacteria and fungus and all kinds of stuff. So you have to have a protective zone. So this is the birth canal. The baby's got to come this way, but it's also got to be the receptor for the sperm, so the sperm can get in and fertilize the egg. Okay, so there's been some coevolution with the vagina and the penis, right? They kind of go together, and so they had to co-evolve, right? Structure, function kind of thing. All right, so what really is it? It's got to have lots and lots of, now you need lots of mucus cells, okay? And you need lots of antibiotics or bacterial things that are going to kill your bacteria. And it has to be muscular enough to push the baby out or help push the baby out. So it's got a ring on what are called rugae. And we're going to see rugae in a couple of places. And the rugae are bends or folds in the stomach that help your stomach expand and contract. Like when you eat a big meal at Thanksgiving, you know your stomach gets real big, the rugae can kind of stretch out, and you feel, oh, really, really full. But then if you don't eat for a couple days, they can contract and make your stomach smaller. Well, the same idea applies to the vagina. The rugae can contract or expand, And when the baby's head's coming down there, they got to expand. And that's part of the pushing from the top, is got to push to make those muscles expand. And then other times they can contract. Okay. So what are the two big functions of the vagina? They're a sperm receptacle and they're a birth canal. Get that head out of here. Okay. Get the head out, we can get the rest out. All right. But again, like the uterus, it's got some stratified squamous, and then it's got, again, smooth muscle fibers. It's not as much of a myometrium as you had up here, but it's still got lots of muscles in it. Okay? Okay. All right, so let's touch on external female anatomy for a minute. So we mentioned before that there were three systems coming together at one point. You've got the urinary system, the digestive system, and the reproductive system, all having exit points. So here is the exit point for the, right here for the opening for the urethra. So that's where your bladder is going to release. Back here is the anal sphincter and the anus, so that's where the digestive system. And then in this case, here is the vagina, the opening to the reproductive system. And you probably have heard this thing about, is her hymen broken? And that proves that she's a virgin or not a virgin. Okay, the hymen is this little membrane that covers the vagina. So if you use a tampon, you'll do that. The first time you have a period, it's going to get broken. So that old thing about, is her hymen broken, yeah, that doesn't really stand up to modern day thinking. All right? But so here's the opening to the vagina, and then in front of that is the clitoris, or the glands of the clitoris. And the clitoris is a homologous structure to a penis. And so both the penis and the clitoris are very highly innervated pieces of tissue. So there are lots of nerves in that one little spot. Okay? Then surrounding all of this on the inside is the labia minor, the inner lips, and then the labia major, the outer lips. The labia major right here are the outer lips, and then the inner lips are and what's a vestibule? Vestibule is a kind of little cavity or waiting area. That's the vestibule right in there. Okay. So when you're about to give birth, the OB will come in and say, oh, you are 3 centimeters dilated or 5 centimeters dilated. And so what they're doing is measuring how far open the vagina is. Okay? And so you know that the baby's head's got to come out of there, so it's got to get pretty big. All right, how big is the baby's head? The baby has some bones in its head that can kind of slip together, but it's still got to get to 10 or 12 centimeters for that baby's head to get out. And then the shoulders can get scrunched up, but they got to come through there too. The feet, the belly and the feet, that's easy, the hips. Once you get the head through, the rest of it's a piece of cake. Okay? Okay. Okay, we will stop at this point. This is where we'll go with the next section, which is the all the hormones. Okay? You got that?